Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Banned and Controversial Foods by Sam O'Nella. Now this is actually one of his newer videos, one of the ones he's made since he came back. It also appears to be a little less history-oriented than his others, though I'm still excited to get into it. Before I do, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Banned and controversial foods. I will say, to give my credentials before we begin, I come from a country with one particular banned and controversial food item. For those who don't know, I was born in Scotland, of course immigrated to the United States as a child, but we have haggis, right? Haggis is essentially sheep offal, all the parts of sheep you don't usually eat, heart, liver, lungs, mixed with oats and spices and onions, and then traditionally presented in a sheep's stomach, though oftentimes that's not the modern presentation. Now, I've had haggis. I actually think it's pretty good. I've had fried haggis before, so, but I'm not a picky eater, right? I know to some people it sounds pretty disgusting, and to my understanding, importing, real haggis in its entirety is banned in the United States, right? You cannot import haggis. Now, maybe in sort of different forms you can, but that's sort of the fact I've heard about it, right? So there's my cred, right? That's the banned and controversial food from my country. So I'm a pretty open-minded guy, you know what I mean? I'm willing to try a lot of things, so I'm curious to see what we have today.
Hey Majors, so I'd like to start off with a little biology lesson. When a species finds itself living on an island, it can start to evolve in strange ways based on the different pressures applied by the new environment.
Right.
This is called island syndrome.
It's also called evolution. Heard of a little guy called Charles Darwin?
While it can manifest in a lot of ways, the biggest driving force is often a lack of predators. For example, the dodo lost its ability to fly since there was nothing to flee from. The saint killed a field mouse got twice as big.
But yeah, it can make animals pretty weird, you know what I mean? You look at animals living in isolation, especially on islands, you can also see the same thing. I think with some of these, what he might be getting to with some of these weird foods, is that perhaps they emerge from being in isolation. I think also out of necessity. You look at a lot of controversial foods around the world, oftentimes they emerge from some type of necessity, and then sometimes they'll become luxuries later in their history.
Since it no longer had to hide. And with no one around to bully them, the Sardinians started putting maggots in their cheese.
Ooh.
Meet Casu Marzu.
Okay.
Literal translation, rotten cheese. It's made by taking a perfectly good wheel of pecorino and letting a special type of fly lay eggs in it. The fly babies then work to partially digest the cheese, rendering it goopy and wet and maybe quite tasty.
Maybe. I will say, a lot of cheese making involves doing stuff to the cheese that would usually be considered some sort of food crime, usually leaving it to get all moldy. But this, this might be a step too far for me.
And worm-filled. Now, cheese as a concept is already quite suspect.
Yeah,
It's clotted milk that you fill with bacteria and mold
Yep.
and let sit for a while. But cheese is safe and delicious. Cheese is my friend.
True.
I trust cheese. So my guard would be down around Casu Marzu. I've learned to look past a cheese's childhood. Strange upbringings are what give them their character. But it turns out, those maggots are still alive. And if you don't chew well enough, they can cause enteric myiasis.
Yeah, okay, I don't like that. I don't like that. I mean, even if the maggots had been taken out, if I knew how it was made, I probably still wouldn't want to eat it. But especially with them still being in there, that's a no-go.
Which is a fancy term for fly larvae living in your intestines.
Ugh.
Symptoms are similar to food poisoning, except with the added psychic pain of knowing that,
Yeah.
again, your bowels are full of squiggly new friends. It's for this reason that Casu Marzu is banned in the EU and elsewhere. A black market still exists, which is
God.
wild, and it's not a small one. In 2019, the illicit Casu Marzu trade was estimated to be worth 2 to 3 million euros
Wow.
annually. Personally, I would just do it prohibition style, like definitely don't put these fly eggs on this sumptuous wheel of pecorino.
I will say, you talked about the psychic damage of having that inside you. I think a lot of controversial and gross foods, it's mainly psychological, right? I talked about haggis earlier. This is the thing with haggis. If you just ate it and didn't know what it was, you would just think it was some sort of minced meat mixed with onions and spices. It tastes pretty good. I think the reason, in my opinion, people don't like it is because they know how it's made or they know what's in it. It's psychological. People say this sometimes with hot dogs in the United States. if people know what's in them, all the different parts of the pig and other stuff, then, then it's psychological. You'll be disgusted and won't want to eat them. Like I said, I'm not a picky eater, so a lot of that stuff doesn't necessarily get to me, though something like this definitely would, but I think a lot of it is psychological.
But if you do, you absolutely shouldn't keep it warm and damp for a week. But although it's traditional to leave the larvae alive when you eat your mac and cheese, some consumers still prefer them dead, shockingly.
Yeah.
In that case, one puts the cheese in a sealed bag, and when the maggots run out of oxygen, they writhe around and fling themselves all over the place. This is heard as a distinct pitter-patter against the walls of the bag, and when the sound stops, the contents are ready to eat. Like popcorn. Shark fin
I just would not want to eat it after that.
soup is one most of us have heard about already,
Yeah.
mostly in reference to its effect on shark populations and the wastefulness that goes into making it. Until recently, though, I never looked into the nature of the dish itself. I figured, right, the fins are just the only part of the shark worth eating. Big whoop, it's probably not much different from, like, swordfish. Apparently, though, I had it backwards. Shark fins aren't even meat. They're made almost entirely of cartilage and collagen. They are the last part we should be eating. That's why it's only made into soup, because without being soaked in broth, it has
Right.
zero flavor or nutritional value on its own. Their only redeeming quality is their
God.
unique mouthfeel due
Not
to how
terrare.
stringly the collagen grows, in structures called ceratotrichia. The texture has been described as somewhere between chewy and crunchy, which I find
Delicious. Well, I guess it's like people often use bones to make stock and stuff like that, right? Provides a lot of flavor, but you wouldn't want to necessarily eat them themselves, right? It's usually an ingredient in something else, or the base for some type of dish.
describes most things, actually. Other adjectives present on Wikipedia include snappy, gelatinous, and sinewy. The exact sensation of eating this substance remains a mystery to me, and the unintended side effect of all this research is that I now really want to try it. Like, it's a big trade. I've got to be the one that's wrong. There is imitation shark fin soup available, but I've already decided that it's not nearly as good. So I've come up with a compromise to this controversy. Everyone on Earth gets just one bite. Say there's 10 bites to a fin,
Okay.
4 fins to a shark, 200 million sharks die, sure, a necessary casualty, but then we can end the practice
How many sharks are there in the world?
forever. All done. You can finally rest, Mr. Ming. Come here, baby. Aw. Ackee.
I mean, look, before we get to that, if it's wiping out shark populations, I wouldn't want to indulge in shark fin soup. But aside from that, that's something I'd be willing to try. I mean, it sounds a little strange and perhaps unappetizing, but, that's something where it's like, yeah, I mean, it's different than what I'd usually eat, but it doesn't necessarily, put me off entirely. But if it's killing all the sharks, then let's not do that.
What? Ackee. Where? Ackee. The ackee is a fruit originally from West Africa, which is most commonly associated with Jamaican cuisine, where it
Okay.
appears in such dishes as ackee and saltfish. These alien kidneys here are called the arils, and they're the only part of the fruit that's actually eaten. The flavor is on the savory side, being described as kind of nutty or bean-like. What makes
I don't know exactly how this crop made its way over, but I've got a pretty good guess, which is when you have, of course, the discovery of the Americas, you then have the slave trade, the importation of a lot of African slaves throughout the Americas, and what that meant was a lot of African crops and dishes and food and traditions and etc. were brought over to some of these places. And so you look around the Americas, but you look at, say, the Caribbean in this case, you'll find a lot of sort of adapted African dishes, using sometimes crops that were brought from Africa and sometimes crops that were then grown in the New World, right? So I don't know if that's exactly the case here, but that'd be my guess.
the ackee controversial, though, is the effects it can cause when prepared improperly. If the arils are allowed to completely ripen, they're harmless. But if you eat them too early, or don't thoroughly clean off all the non-aril stuff, it can cause Jamaican vomiting sickness.
Ooh.
This disease doesn't sound real. It sounds like it belongs next to Eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings. But that's actually an official term, and as for symptoms, it does what it says on the tin.
Right.
Plus maybe death. While
Oh.
ackee-based products aren't outright illegal in the United
Yeah, if I'm eating a food which has a even slight chance of instant death beyond, I don't know, me like choking on something, then I don't really want to eat it. You know what I mean? I'd rather not have a chance of dying when I'm eating what I'm eating. Now, you know, the sort of long extended death of eating processed foods, we all indulge in that, unfortunately. But if there's a chance of immediate onset death, maybe not.
United States, they are very tightly regulated, and the raw fruit itself cannot be imported. So if you're American and want to try it, your options are fully cooked canned ackee or going to Florida, where a few people grow it domestically. Next we have bird's nest soup. This is another one that I've vaguely heard of, and for years I just assumed the name was a playful metaphor, like ants on a log or shit on a shingle. Turns out, nope, this dish contains an actual bird nest, not like a pile of twigs like I was picturing, but rather a specific type of nest only made by certain species of swiftlets. These nests are mostly made out of musons, which
Ever heard of any of this? Frankly, Swiftlet sounds like a Pokemon.
are a set of proteins that, among other things, serve to thicken all
Not to show my ignorance too much, I guess.
those wonderful secretions our bodies make. There's a little bit in human saliva, a little bit more in mucus, and in swiftlet saliva, look out, pal. So all the swiftlet does is it finds a nice wall, starts laying out fat strings of slobber, which dry, and eventually she's got a nice place to roost. That is, right up until some gourmand says,
Today I crave bird spit.
I do feel like in some contexts I've heard of people eating or trying bird saliva, which that one sounds really disgusting, I'm not gonna lie.
You can keep the eggs, though.
and they then reconstitute it back into its original gelatinous texture. Unfortunately, these nests can't enter the US since, believe it or not, eating bird saliva is a great way to catch bird flu. And now the time has come to speak of the ortolan. The ortolan is a kind of bunting, which is a sort of passerine, which is a type of bird.
Okay.
They're birds. Like many animals, they have a long history of being eaten by the French. But what separates the ortolan from your average squab or pheasant is the unique way in which it is prepared and eaten. They're typically caught with nets and kept in the dark, which causes them to overeat for some reason. Once it's about twice as fat, the entire bird is then thrown into a container of brandy, alive, and sealed in. While this
Yeah, I mean, classic French style of cooking. Take an animal, torture it as much as you can imagine, and then that makes it delicious, apparently. So, this is sort of, you can think of like foie gras or something like that. This is already appearing to be in line with other French styles of cooking.
serves to marinate the creature, it also drowns in the process, thereby killing one bird with no stones. The ortolan is then roasted, plucked, and presented whole to the consumer, who inserts the carcass into their mouth, feet first. As they chew, one hand continues holding the bird's head, while the other picks out the larger bones. This whole ritual is usually performed with a towel or large napkin over one's head.
Oh,
There's a
wow.
few explanations for the purpose of the towel. Some say
You're
it's
so ashamed.
just there to keep the aromas in, while others say it's there to, quote, shield from God's eyes.
That's what I was saying. Wow, that's actually funny. I was kind of kidding, but you're shielding your decadent, disgraceful, and shameful act.
The shame of such a decadent and disgraceful act. Yeah, this one I'm okay with not trying, actually.
Yeah.
Notable
Once again, it's sort of somewhat like the shark fin soup, where because of the impact it has on the animal or the population of animals, nah, I'm not really into that one. There are some items that are just disgusting and you're put off by it, right? Like the bird spit. But then some of them, you're like, I don't really like how this was prepared. And to be fair, there's a lot of, you want to talk about food preparation, look at any meat industry around the world, a lot of it's not good, but
fans of this dish include, not joking, Bill Cosby and the guy who invented the lobotomy.
Oh,
Glad to be part of that
wow.
social club. Our mission is to eat birds whole.
Yeah, I'm not feeling too bad about not being included with those guys.
And then make people not remember things. Killing ortolans was banned across the EU in 2007. Not for any ethical reason, but because French people did this so much that the entire ortolan population was threatened. Thankfully, as of 2018, their conservation status is under least concern, so hopefully the French can get back to it soon. Anyway, that's all I have for today.
Let's hope
Until
not.
next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
Oh, all right. Quick end on that one. All right, another good Salmonella video. Like I said, that one was less to do with history, more sort of strange cultural stuff around the world. And like I said, there's a division between some controversial foods that don't bother me, I'm fine with them. Some that just blatantly disgust me, I'm not going to try that. And then some that I wouldn't want to try due to their impact on the world. I guess that's where the problems really come in. So there was some pretty gross stuff throughout this video, I'm not going to lie. He made a pretty decent selection here. Skipped over some of the controversial foods around the world that aren't actually, I think, that gross. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't think haggis is that gross, to be honest. I know I'm biased very much, but I think there's a lot of those types of foods where it's like, this gross food. And you're like, it's just like the weird parts of a sheep or something. Or a pig. I don't think that's that weird, you know? Anyway, yeah, another good one. If you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all that out of the way, I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.